It has a bunch of like Philadelphia stuff on it. I found it at this flea market in Texas, and I was like, I had to have it because I like American stuff.
It's
And
so
I
cute. I
was
love it. Oh my gosh, it's adorable.
like, oh, I need that. I'm
It's
gonna
so
start
cool.
taking the
Yeah.
patriotism back
And yes, we have
for the
to,
win.
right?
Yes,
Yes.
I need this. So I'm here with Senator Jen Day. Jen is just such a marvelous advocate for people, for children, for education, for health and humanities in Nebraska. And I think you're going into your running campaign right now.
Yep, so it'll be my second 4-year term,
Yeah, amazing. And then we have our vote coming up November 5th,
November 5th. 2 weeks from tomorrow.
2 weeks from tomorrow. And so I just assume that you've been hitting the pavement, knocking on doors,
Yes.
calling, all of that stuff.
All the things. I will say that it's nice the second time around. I'm an incumbent, so we have a lot more financial resources, that we can do a lot more media and all of that, but we're still doing all of the same things that we did the first time, which is just constantly knocking doors and making phone calls and doing community events and all of that. So the last 2 weeks
Yes.
are here, thank goodness, finally. So, but it's all good. Yeah. So the election was 2020, and then my term started technically in 2021 in January.
Okay, got you.
Yes, but it was very much the middle of the pandemic still. They had it was really difficult as a new senator because I couldn't, have those face-to-face meetings with people and build those relationships. We had a really weird structure in the chamber in terms of like we had all of this, plexiglass in between us and around us, and we had weird stuff with the mics that we couldn't share, and we were masked the whole time. Um, so it was a really, really interesting time to be an incoming senator, that's for sure.
And I assume also a challenging time with so many different opposing views on how to handle
Yeah.
COVID, what people think about COVID, and part of your platform is in public safety.
Yep.
Um and so in public health. So it's like,
Yeah.
I wish I could
It
take
was
off right now.
it was so wild. And I had seen what people were saying because I was really campaigning during the largest portion of it. And I had seen what people were saying about masks and generally just about COVID and how it came about and sort of the really misinformation and disinformation that existed. And then I actually was put on the Health and Human Services Committee
Mhm.
for my first session. So there was some really interesting pieces of legislation that I had to sit through hearings for, a lot of like anti-vax type stuff. And I firmly believe in science and medicine. And so it was really, it was really interesting. I think, and I would say in terms of the colleagues that I work with and them being anti-mask and some of them anti-vax, although I am fully vaccinated and wore a mask the whole time, I have had COVID 3 times now since I'm
Wow.
a
Wow.
senator, and I've gotten it every time from the Capitol. I even had it most recently this past session at the Capitol, and people were hacking and coughing, and no one was wearing masks. And I, of course, got tested myself and sat up in the balcony with my mask on because I had some important votes that I needed to be there for. But it just really, it continues essentially, the issues that we're having with COVID and how it's spread throughout the Capitol. And um, it's a weird, wild world in that place. That's for sure.
I assume that I spoke with Ashley Spivey and Precious McKeeson earlier
Yeah.
this month, and we were kind of just talking about like all of the ways that Nebraska is a really interesting state because we are bipartisan. We're a
Right.
red state with our blue dot, and
Right.
um the way you guys and other Democratic senators or independent senators really like have to hold it down in the Nebraska ledge. And like, what is that like? I told Precious, I said, I always wanted to run for office, but two things stopped me. And I said, it's my past. I've got some
Yeah.
screenshots out there. We're just gonna keep them to ourselves. And my temper. I just feel like
Yeah.
my head would explode.
I mean, honestly, I've been really close to my head exploding multiple times, and I'm very similar in that way. Um, it is, I will tell you, I hate giving people a negative perspective on the Nebraska legislature, but if I'm being honest, it is, I would say, probably the most toxic work environment I have ever worked in,
Right.
specifically because of that, right? So, we are in the minority in the body. And I can tell you that, one of the reasons I got involved in politics in the first place was because I saw how public policy, like, genuinely affects people's lives, for better or for worse. And I saw that if we can get good people elected, we can craft the laws that govern us in a way that makes people's lives better. Like, every single bill that you vote on, there's a human being on the other end of that.
Yeah.
And so that's something that I take very, very seriously. And I went in with this kind of naive idea that if you just talk to people, if you just sit down and help them understand what are the possible negative, unintended consequences of a piece of legislation, whether that's, kids are going to go hungry, or, people are going to be trapped in poverty, or, like we talk about some of the abortion bans, like women are going to die. And I have had those conversations with people face to face. And I can tell you that I have never met so many people in one place who just genuinely don't care. It's hard. If I think that's the hardest part about it, right? Is like, we introduce legislation, or I introduce legislation because I want to make people's lives better, right? Like, I want to make sure kids have food or healthcare, or, a quality education, all of those things. And we have to work with people who are completely indifferent to the suffering of human beings.
Right.
And not just indifferent sometimes, but it almost feels intentional. And it's a really, really odd thing to have to, like, come to the realization that there's a lot of people in positions of power that just don't care. Um, and on top of that, there's also a lot of people in power that not only don't care, but sometimes they take a little bit of enjoyment in particular groups suffering. And then on top of that, I have bills that I need to get across the finish line, and I need their votes in order to get
Right.
my work done, right?
So then that
So,
comes down to a bargaining chip that has nothing to do with the actual humanity of the bill, but has to do with I'll scratch your back, you scratch mine.
yes,
Wow.
unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
And I haven't really done a whole lot of that. I kind of dabbled in that a little bit at times, and I just never felt good about doing it.
Right. It's a
I
different mindset, a different reason to go into it.
Yeah, like trading votes and like that kind of stuff. I just couldn't get myself to do it. So I had to very proactively develop and create relationships with people that I virtually have nothing in common with, right? They're on the total opposite end of the political spectrum for me. Um, so honestly, that a lot of times would come down to us just talking about our kids, talking about their
Mhm.
grandkids. We would often, connect on those issues in terms of family and, kind of like core values, I guess. But it's really, really, it's a tough environment to work in. And I would say that that's probably the most difficult thing about the job, is just being in the minority,
Mm,
in the body, and genuinely caring about people, because that's what public policy is supposed to be about.
right.
And then having to work within a system where the majority maybe just doesn't quite grasp what it means to push red or green on a particular bill and what that suffering looks like on the other side of that. It keeps me up at night.
Yeah.
I have had so many like really serious conversations with my kids about this stuff because they watch and they pay attention and their friends watch and they pay attention. But really my kids are 16 and 12, and we started having some of those conversations when the 2016 election happened. So I think my kids
Mm-hmm.
are kind of aware, but it's not fun at
What do you
times.
think that is? So if your reason, and if I ever went into office, my reason would be to help people. My reason would
Right.
be to stop world hunger, right?
Mhm.
Bring world peace.
Right.
What is the entry point on the other side then for the people, and not everyone on the other side, but and it's not even across party lines, but for the people who kind of like don't share that hope for humanity, what is their game here?
I think that's a really good question, and I still am not really sure that I know the answer.
Mhm.
And I try to be optimistic about it, like, these people care. They just they have a different way of getting there. And I think there are some of those people, right? Like those are usually like your squishy middle moderates who
Right.
you feel like, okay, if I do talk to them, they're going to understand that this could be really, really bad.
Mhm. Mhm.
But I would say those people are limited in the body right now, and a lot of the other folks, there is a really weird perception of like this like access to power and proximity to power, and they just it's something that gives them some kind of like,
Yeah.
I don't know, like they feel important, or it feeds their ego in some way. And that sounds really like simplistic to say that, but I seriously cannot. I have tried to come up. I think about this stuff, right? Like you
Right,
said,
right, right.
like I sit and I'm like, why do they do that? Why do they want to do this? Why do they go through all of this work to get here? And then what's the motivation for them? And really, I think for a lot of people it is power. I mean, because I've seen people too who have gotten elected to the legislature and were considered to be moderate, from the right, but considered to be moderate, and
Right.
then moved on to other elected positions that were maybe higher up, and they've completely changed who they were as a policymaker and as a person publicly because it was politically advantageous to them.
Wow.
Um, but I mean, you see that in politics all over, right?
Yeah.
I mean, people just want access to power. It
I need to
feels
see their
good.
ballot polls results. Like, where are
Yeah.
where's
Yeah,
everybody
right? Like
leaving?
who are you as a person? Like
Yes.
what are you motivated by? And you know, and sometimes I think that some of them are well-meaning.
Yeah, of course.
Like I
Of
don't want
course.
to say all of this negative stuff, and I think that some of them are well-meaning, and I just also think that there's not a lot of like really, adversarial life experience in some of these situations too.
Agreed.
So I don't know. If somebody out there knows what the motivation is for these people, I would love for you to share it with me because I'm just as confused sometimes.
And to be clear, it's not for me, it's not like we're discussing like all Republicans or X, Y, and Z. But I
No.
guess the larger thing is for people who get into politics who are not motivated by that deep desire to help. That's really what the question
Right.
is, right? Is like, okay, well then what is that? Who bullied you on
Yeah.
right? Who bullied you? Because it started in childhood. Somewhere you
Oh
needed
yeah. For
information.
sure. There's some sense of like something that they're trying to fulfill by having this position that makes them feel powerful, or um and it's really odd that I think there's just a lot of adults in the world that need some therapy, and I think that there's a lot of them that also hold positions of power as well. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
Okay, so when you were first considering, you're like kind of like thinking about maybe I might kind of start doing this thing. What was that journey for you, and what got you to say I'm in?
Yeah, so I had originally started I had a friend who was on the Friends of Planned Parenthood board, and she was terming off, and she was like, "Hey, would you be interested?" So this was in 2010, I think. And I was like, sure. And I got elected to the board. And that was when I really started to get a better picture of what public policy, the landscape was in Nebraska.
Right.
Um, it was certainly a lot darker than I thought it was,
Mhm.
coming from the background that I came from. And from there, I made the decision. I had met Dr. Jody Nedry Castro, who was also on the board with me. She was a teacher of political science at the University of Nebraska at Omaha. And I decided to go back to school to get a BS in political science, because it just interested me. I just wanted to know more about how government functioned. And I thought, maybe I would work on campaigns. I would be a campaign manager or something like that. I am pretty introverted, so the idea of knocking on doors and going to public events and talking, public speaking was really nerve-wracking to me. But I knew that I wanted to be more involved in public policy somehow,
Right.
whatever that meant. And the reality was there just wasn't a lot of those jobs at that time that, I could actually make a living off of. And I was kind of also simultaneously figuring out that I was really disappointed with the lack of representation in my district, in particular, in District 49. And it was sort of this strange succession of there was a guy that had represented the district, and he was running unopposed for state treasurer. And then, so I knew the governor was going to appoint someone. The governor appointed someone from that man's office, his legislative aide, to his seat. Um, and I just, it was a young man, and nothing against the young man, but he was young, unmarried. He didn't have kids. Like, he didn't
Yeah.
seem to he didn't have like roots in the community. And being we know we're a pretty suburban district with a lot of young families. It just, I just was unhappy,
You
I
didn't feel
guess.
represented.
I'm sorry?
You didn't feel represented.
Exactly. Right. I didn't feel represented. I didn't feel represented prior to him being appointed, and then I certainly didn't feel represented after he was appointed.
Yeah.
And the 2020 election was coming up. We're kind of looking to see if somebody would be available to run against him, and there was just no one. I mean, nobody wants to run for office, really.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Well,
and
it's terrifying.
it
I
is
think it's one of
terrifying.
the
And
most vulnerable
yes.
things a person can do.
Yeah. And like you were saying, they'll dig through your past and they'll make everything public, and they'll lie about you and humiliate you. And so yes, it is a very vulnerable place to be, and it is really nerve-wracking. And we couldn't find anybody to run against him. And I was like, you know what? I talked to my husband about it. We had owned a business at the time. And I was like, maybe I'll just decide to run, just to give people an option, right? Like, there should at least be two people on the ballot, so people have a choice. Everybody was like, you can't win in this district, there's no way. And I was like, okay, I get it. But we're gonna at least start having real conversations. I'm gonna force this guy to have to actually campaign, because I'm gonna be campaigning. He's gonna have to go to doors, and he's gonna have to talk to people. And that's really all I wanted, was maybe to just move the needle a little bit.
Mhm.
And then we got into it and realized that we might actually be able to win.
Wow. Wow. Wow.
And we did in 2020. And so it really was, it was an odd way of getting into politics. I think a lot of people are recruited, and I was never asked to run. I just made the decision on my own. And now I'm running for re-election 4 years later. So
Yeah. And here you go.
yeah.
When you got into it, did you find, so I assume that you did because you're going again. Like, did you find, I guess, where do you find your home inside of the work that you're doing? Like, you're
For
like, oh, this is my why, and this is why I'm going to keep going.
Yeah, great question. One of my favorite things to talk about, and I've talked about this several times on the floor, because there's definitely been points where I have been kind of on the fence and making a decision about where do I go with my vote. Yes, am I a yes, or am I a no? But for me, I always say that my North Star is my kids,
Yeah.
because they were, again, reproductive rights access and quality public education were two of the major issues that I genuinely really cared about that got me involved in the first place. And, you know, like I don't even remember what the bill was, but I remember specifically talking about this on the floor because there's so much pressure that you get to vote one way or the other. And it gets, on top of what we were talking about earlier with just the crazy toxicity of the environment.
Right.
There's pressure from outside forces and really from inside of trading votes or, just vote yes on cloture, but then vote no on there's all of this weird game playing and stuff too. And so you really get into the middle of debate. And as a new senator, it was kind of like, I would get kind of like lost in what was going on. But I remember looking at pictures of my kids on my desk and I was like, I got to go home at the end of the day and I got to look them in the eye. Right.
Yeah.
And I wanted them to be proud of me. And so for me, it was always, I'm going to make a decision that I know my kids will be proud of. And that's how I'm going to be able to sleep at night. Right.
Yeah.
Because, again, my kids have been raised around politics and they're still very young, so they don't know everything. But they also do have strong opinions and they know right from wrong, I guess, at the very least. And so, I think that's for me is like, it's just my kids, like, they're my guiding light. I make decisions on what's going to positively affect their future. And, what's going to make them proud at the end of the day that I'm their mom. So,
Well, I'm gonna make me tear up.
it sounds crazy, but like, it's so true. Cause it's like, you get so deep in your feelings in these decisions that you make. And so ultimately it really forces you to think about like, what do I really want? And what is really, really right. And that will always be what makes my kids proud and what makes them happy.
I love that so much. I'm a big proponent of finding your own truth, finding your North Star, and that can't lead you wrong, when you get back to the
Absolutely.
dirt. Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's what it's about is like, especially when you're making these really tough decisions, there is something in you that knows, right? And you just have to kind of figure out where that is and keep your eye on that. And you can always come back to it to kind of guide you. And like you said, you can't go wrong. Like, the next right decision, one decision at a time. And yeah, you can't go wrong.
When I was talking to Ashley, she told this story about her son when she was deciding she was gonna run. Her son was like all in. He was like, "Okay, what are we gonna do?" And I
Yeah.
told her I was cleaning one of my kids' rooms one night, and they had, I think it was my oldest son, but he had drawn a poster of one of my plays, and he was like, "By Beaufield Berry," and I was just like,
Yeah.
like they're really
Right.
watching, and like
Of course.
when
You
you're
you
in it.
you don't think they are? You don't
Yeah.
think they are? Because like, they have their own lives and they're doing their own things and, like, you're just mom, right?
I don't feel like you guys care about anything I do.
Yeah, right. I can't get you to, like, listen to me to put your shoes on when we're
Yeah.
trying to leave, like, but they are, and, like, to see stuff like that, like, you see how proud of you. It's just, I don't know. There's nothing like that in the whole wide world, you know?
There's something like that.
Mhm.
So, how has your husband taken to being like the first gentleman in your health?
Yeah, so he and I ran the campaign in 2020 on our own.
Mhm.
He was like my campaign manager basically, and I made that decision number one because we just didn't have any money. I didn't have any money to pay a campaign manager at the
Yeah.
time, so we just kind of had to do with what we had. But we had also ran a business together for 10 years, and we had worked out a lot of those things that you have to work out when you're married and you own a business together and you have kids together. And he knows who I am and he
Mhm.
respects who I am as a person and as a candidate, really. And he's my campaign manager. He's my best friend. my biggest cheerleader. It's not easy to be a spouse of someone who's in the legislature.
Right.
I know that's one of the toughest things that people go through a lot of times is it's a complete change of daily life and roles, and especially when we're in session. But there was never a question from him. Like,
Yeah.
he takes over everything when I'm in session, basically. Like the
Yeah.
kids, I mean, completely, because there's days where I'm gone from 7, 8 in the morning until midnight or later. Sometimes I spend the night in Lincoln. And never does he, it's stressful. I mean, that,
Of
to be
course.
honest, there's been times where we've had some serious discussions about what can and can't happen when I'm in session. Um, but I wouldn't be able to do this job without him. I wouldn't have been able to run the first time without him. He's my campaign manager this time around as well. And I chose him because he knows what he's doing. He's very good at the job.
Yeah.
Um,
He was
but
highly
also,
merit.
yeah, like he, he also just totally gets me and
Mm.
all of my weirdness and things that I need. And so, it's tough and it's stressful. It's not an easy thing when you have young kids, especially because they got to get to school. They have
Yeah.
activities. I have 2 boys who play every sport under the sun. So
Oh my God. The
it,
freaking schedules.
the schedules are just, I mean, practice, 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 practice over here. And then this one has practice over here. And like,
Yes.
it's chaos,
My kid had a game in Fremont yesterday. I'm like, no, nobody even, why are we in
Yeah.
Fremont?
Why are we in Fremont? Yeah. Like, I
Yeah.
mean, we have soccer this weekend in Kansas City and football during the week, and I mean it's total chaos all the time. But he never questioned any of it. He is always the one to go buy the newspaper when he sees that I'm in it. Um,
I
you
love
know, yeah. So he's pretty incredible and a really really important piece of the puzzle for me to be able to do this job.
when you're in public facing stuff like a state dinner or you're doing like, a talk somewhere. I know you at Kanara like recently.
Yeah.
Um, what is, I guess, what is your expectation of your spouse in that moment? Because I think
Sure.
when it's reversed, right, and it's like the wives of senators,
Mhm.
there's a lot of expectations around women in terms of like what you look like, the way you behave, the way you present yourself. What happens when that's on its head?
Yeah, that's really interesting. It's weird because he is my campaign manager, and so he knows everybody that,
Hmm.
he knows my network of people and he spends a lot of time talking to them. Um, I would say he's also like the opposite of me when it comes to like my introversion. He's equally extroverted. So when we go into a room of people, he can very easily just make 10 friends as soon as he walks in, and
Right.
so I feel like almost it's different because he is a man.
Hmm.
Um I think there is less pressure on, you know, that there's that weird thing like when men are in positions of power and then their wives have to sort of become this like backup or like almost like Stepford wife in a little bit,
Yeah.
a little a way, right? Where they have this role that they have to play. And you have to be very polished.
We know what that looks like too. Like we can picture in our heads the way a woman is supposed to behave,
Yes,
look, dress.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. And I think that some of that still applies a little bit for men.
Hmm.
I think especially in a district like mine, people have certain expectations of what you're going to look like and how you're going to dress. I mean, John has had long hair, short hair. He
Yes.
did cut his hair the first time we were campaigning from like, like beneath his shoulders to a really short haircut, just to be more generally appealing.
Right.
Um,
Wow.
I
Yeah.
think to maybe a general population, I guess. So there is still some of that expectation, I think. I, you know, I don't know. Like being social and all of that is just something that comes naturally to him. So I don't know that for him, at least, there has been any, I guess I would need to ask him, but if there's
Right.
been any like expectations that have been put on him that he has felt like he's had to like fulfill that maybe he wasn't comfortable doing, or maybe just, weren't his natural personality. I would say that there's likely less pressure from that perspective,
For
but
sure.
he tends to just naturally
He knows
fill
what's
that role anyways. Yeah,
right. He's extroverted campaign manager. He's like on PR watch. I think
yes,
really interesting though, like especially as we find more women in office and more women in higher office who are being supported at home by their husbands, what that's going to do to those kind of like,
right,
roles.
right,
Yeah.
right. And I think that I mean, I think it's a great thing because
Good.
I think that too, like, you know, we have a very rigid idea in the United States of what elected officials are supposed to look like and how they're supposed to act and who they are, what their family looks like if they have a family. And we're literally just barely scratching the surface of that maybe changing so that
Mhm.
it's socially acceptable for a white woman to be in a position of power.
Right.
And like, we are barely, barely, barely starting to get there. But there's so many people that, you know, are in non-traditional family roles, that are, have just they're not your stereotypical, you know, white picket fence family.
Yes. It's not,
And
it's good for us too as Nebraskans because that's what we've been
yep,
built on. And it leaves so many different kinds of families
yes. And
as yeah.
ideas and thoughts and life experiences, like that life experience that you get just from not being the default is
Yes.
really valuable when you're making public policy, right? So we have a really long ways to go, I think, in getting, an appropriate number of a better ratio of population to representatives elected. Um, and we're just barely, barely starting to get there. But I look forward to having better representation, especially here in Nebraska. I think we're getting there.
I truly, truly,
Yeah.
truly hope that we are. I'm so excited about some of the candidates this year.
Mhm.
I'm, I mean,
Yes.
I'm just ecstatic at the idea of having a new mayor, and I'm gonna do everything I can. I
Yes.
helped the Jasmine campaign. Was that 4 years ago? I think it was.
Yeah.
Um, I know she's jumping in a little late in the game, but wait, the mayoral race isn't until next year. You know,
Correct.
right,
Yep.
right, right. So she's got time.
Yep.
Um, and I think even just seeing, however anything turns out, just seeing another
Yes.
way forward, another option is just
Yes.
so healthy for us
And
as a community.
she's incredible. And like, her to get in front of people and to talk to them. And like,
Mm.
again, just having the example out there. I mean, obviously, we all would love for her to get elected, right? But just having her out there in front of people talking and people seeing that, like you said, there's a different way to do politics, right?
Yes.
Um, and sometimes it can be a lot better, right? If we see what the alternative is to the traditional, you know, normal elected
Yeah.
officials.
The safe route
Yes,
that is
state, right.
safe route that's also
Mhm.
continually marginalized people or left people
Yep.
feeling without, but you just kind of keep going back to it because that's what you're familiar with. And
Right,
it's
right.
time to really shake that up. I was doing the Benson parade. I work at Benson Theater. And so we were out there during the parade and we were just screaming and Ashley had this huge long
Yeah.
and like the drums came out. I was like, oh my God.
Sure.
And then the mayor's people came out and they were like giving me candy and I was like, are you giving me candy for my vote? And then like it was so nice. She's just like, I'm just doing my job. Okay. I'll just eat the Skittles and shut
I
up.
mean, yeah, right. Yeah, right. And like younger people too. Like,
Yeah.
I think that we have, I don't want to be like ageist about it,
Yeah.
but just the younger, exciting candidates that, I think that that's even reflected a little bit in the presidential race of like, it's just exciting to
Mhm.
have someone younger, right?
Yes.
Or relatively speaking, younger who has the energy and like, we see them at things like parades. You're like, oh, like, there, it's just cool and interesting
Yeah.
versus again, like the status quo kind of,
I'm
you know,
really down for a millennial takeover. Like,
yes,
I
yes,
feel like we have paid our dues
yes,
over the years. We paid our dues. We were raised during the Gulf War. We all remember where we were during 9/11 and fallout from that. We survived that the first and the second Bush administrations. Um,
yeah,
we were all like college age or
yeah,
to give or take when 2008 happened and Wall Street fell apart. Everybody's struggling to like own a home. So it's just like I feel like millennials have paid our dues and it's
yes.
time to, step aside and listen and start moving in that direction.
Isn't it? I think it's so interesting too, because I don't even know what the average age of my colleagues is, but I mean, we have bills that we pass that it's like I don't even know if you're going to be around by the time the real effects of this legislation are going
Yep.
to be felt in the community. Like
Yeah.
people are creating laws for other generations that are going to have to live through it and exist through it. And, like, I get that like there's experience and a lot of times older candidates have more money and so there's that factor in it too, but like why don't we have more young people in elected positions because they're the ones whose lives are going to be affected, and their kids, right? Like
Oh yeah, absolutely. But I feel like, and my statements are my own, but
yeah.
I do feel like that's something that Republicans are really good at doing. They're good at playing the long game. They're really good at that long-term strategy. And I think it's kind of where our conversation started. It's, I'm here to win
Mhm.
this chess
Yes,
game. I'm not
absolutely.
here to hear your life story about why we play chess,
Mhm.
right? And so, like,
Absolutely.
we can make these big long-term moves because
Mhm.
I don't care if I'm dead.
Mhm.
I want America to look like
Like
this.
this. Yep. Yep. You're totally right. And it's something that we as Democrats have not done as effectively. And we're seeing that now too,
Yeah.
right? Like with the Dobbs decision and all of that, that was them playing the long game.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know how it's going to work out for them now that the tables are turning a little bit, but they're definitely better at that, the long game strategy than we are. So, I don't know. We're working on it though, right?
Yes.
We're getting
Yes.
there. I genuinely think that like we're making some progress when it comes to being able to, build a bench and recruit better candidates, more candidates, creating a better uh financial environment for candidates to be able to have actual campaigns. Um it's just barely starting here in Nebraska. We are obviously long past due, but we're getting there. So I'm hoping that we can, and I see some of that long-term strategy coming from within the party here in the state, and obviously outside of the state as well. So we just have to be able to like stick with that and
Well,
follow through on that,
yeah.
but
Um, and I think too, like tides are turning in terms of like Gen Z. There's so many things that they're not
yes.
going to stand for. And
Mhm.
there's so many things that they have access to now. I mean, they can just you turn on your phone and you see innocent people being bombed and killed.
Mhm.
Like, oh, I'm not doing that
Yep.
anymore. And so
Yep.
that is going to force the kind of like old hat Democrats,
Yep.
that's going to force them into a place of progress. and start moving
Right.
quicker, moving more strategically, moving
Right.
more to the left, opening up some of those moderate
Right.
views to include more people.
Right.
And I think that alone is that excitement is
Right.
going to like scare, the
Oh,
Republicans who are, yeah,
absolutely. And more just general accountability just with the access to the internet and information. And, even myself as an elected official, the times that people have held me accountable for bad decisions that I've made, it really makes you think. And it's such a good thing. Like information, people hate on TikTok and all of this stuff, but I'm like, there's so much incredible information out there.
oh
And
yeah,
they should have access to it, right? Like
yeah,
let them have access to the information and make up their minds on their own. And I love the energy that you get from, Gen Z and the mobilization and the engagement that I don't know, like it didn't exist when I was in high school. That was not a thing. At least where I grew up, like talking about politics and all of that was not a thing that we really ever did.
yeah.
So it's so refreshing to see that that kids are paying attention and engaged and organized, and I absolutely love it. I absolutely love it.
I think we paved the way
Yeah.
for them. But the first election that I couldn't vote yet, but the one I really started paying attention to was Al Gore, George Bush,
Yeah.
right? And then how imperative we didn't know how imperative that election would end up being.
Mhm.
Huge. And so then after that, his second run, I worked on the Kerry campaign. Uh,
Okay.
and I came home uh to find out that Kerry had conceded. And I just remember dropping to my knees
Mm,
in the
mm,
most dramatic of fashions and just
mm,
sobbing because I'm like,
mm.
even here in Nebraska, I had put like a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. Like I was excited. I was like,
Yeah.
my best friend was deployed during 9/11.
Mm,
My brother had just joined the military. And
mm.
so like I had,
Yeah.
you know, um
Right.
skin in the game.
Right.
And
Right.
so to come home and see that, I was like, I didn't even know that could happen.
Right.
And
Right.
it just motivates you.
Yeah, it does. And I remember that. Like I remember the Bush election. I remember really distinctly too Obama being elected for the first time.
Yes. Oh my God, it
And
was huge.
that was the first time I had really felt like emotional when a president got elected, right? Where it was like, you know, um, obviously we've seen a lot of awful things that have happened since then, but it felt like, you can feel the positivity and maybe things are going to go in the right direction. But I think that that's like, when you say you have skin in the game, it's also, though, I think that there is that perspective that is missing, like I was saying earlier, in politics, and is just genuinely feeling and understanding what that means for people. What does it mean that Kerry conceded? Not just for you personally, but for all of these other people who are going to be affected by, you know, any elected position.
Mm.
And we just, we desperately need more of that. It's really, really hard to keep yourself close to the work, I think, and close to the human aspect of it because it's painful,
Yes.
because when you lose, it's, what that means for people.
Yeah.
And it's painful and you really understand the suffering, that could come from that. It's hard to keep yourself that close to that,
Mhm.
while you're involved in it and still, be able to do your job
You have to
effectively.
protect yourself so that you can keep moving forward and not fall into,
Truly,
yeah,
truly,
deep, dark depression and stay in your bed all day.
truly. And, like I've been there in the last 4 years as a senator. Like we've had some really awful stuff that's happened in the
Yeah.
legislature. And you, there's people that are depending on you, right? They're depending on you to get your ass out of bed and do something and do the right thing and advocate for them and talk to your colleagues. And but they're also depending on you to like put everything that you have into it to try to make
Yes.
things right.
Yes.
So it's like it's almost it's it's hard. It's a weird balance. And I think that that's why so many people who have been in politics for so long kind of become jaded because they do protect themselves from feelings sometimes. But I
Right.
think that that's the most important quality that you can have as an elected official is caring, you know, like it sounds simple and silly, but just really caring and understanding that it really does mean something to people. Politics changes people's lives day to day. And who gets elected to what position, it all really means something to somebody. So it's just nice, you know, when I meet people who are really genuinely invested in the candidates that they're working for, um, or, you know, if staff that works at the Capitol that really genuinely cares about the work that they're doing, it just reminds me that like there is people out there that care. We just got to get them into the right positions, you
We got to
know?
vote them in. Okay,
Yeah.
so for people who are local to us, we're going to put this up before the election. So what what do you need? What do you need from your community?
Yeah. You know, I will be honest, things are going really, really well right now. We have so many people out canvassing regularly, doing phone calls. We have TV ads running. We have lots of social media stuff happening. I think for me at this point, you know, we're so close to the election. It's just talking to your friends. You know, if you
Yeah.
live in the district and you support, if you're willing to put a sign in your yard, that's always a really big deal. Sometimes I have people who are not in the district that have one of my signs in their windows. I'm always all for that too. Um, you know, talking to your neighbors, just that neighborly word of mouth is something that I can't make happen from my perspective. But when people are willing to talk to their neighbors about, you know, oh, hey, you know, I have a Gen Day yard sign, that type of stuff is really what we're looking for at this point. Things are going really, really well. And I'm very proud of everything that we've done and where we're at. But just tell your friends, make sure they're voting.
Yes.
That's the first and foremost. Make sure they have a plan to vote. And then if you live in the district and you're a supporter, just make sure you're talking to your neighbors about it too and how important this election is all the way down the ballot.
Well, you just make me feel so hopeful and weirdly emotional
Mhm.
that that there are people with so much just
Oh,
like love and heart, you know, in our capital and representing. I'm not in your district, but I feel represented by you. And I feel
thank you.
safer as a Nebraskan and as a mother,
Mm,
as a single mother,
mm.
I feel safer knowing that you and colleagues like you are in there fighting for all of us.
Thank you. Thank you. That's so kind.
Um, Thank you for being with me today.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. This was really fun.
I'm gonna stop the recording and then you just have to wait until